What's up, FemFuture fam? Just wanted to hop on real quick and let you guys know that we had a couple technical difficulties at the beginning of this week's episode. So if you want to avoid those, please do jump to around the 2-minute mark. And thank you so much for understanding that life still be lifing. Enjoy today's episode. What's up, y'all? This is the FemFuture Podcast, where you, me, and the audience around us get the opportunity to learn from amazing women curating a better future for themselves and others. I'm your host, Amber Latrice, and today we are joined by an engineer, an entrepreneur, an innovator, women's health advocate, and CEO and founder of Simply Fed, Miss Andrea. How are you doing today?
Oh my gosh, I'm doing well, but thanks so much for that introduction. I feel so psyched for this conversation.
Awesome. Me too. Welcome to the pod. And you and I got the opportunity to have a little bit of conversation before we started recording, before our audience members that maybe are not as familiar with you. Can you tell them a little bit about you?
Yeah, well, my name is Andrea Ippolito, and I'm the CEO and founder of Simply Fed. And I'm also a mom of two. I have a daughter, May. You might hear her in the background, and she's 5. And I also have a daughter, Lulu. And here is one of them. And this is
Hi.
Can you say hi? Maybe I'm on a recording right now. I'm so sorry.
This is amazing. I'm here for mom's mommy. No worries.
So my name is Andrea Ippolito, and I'm the CEO and founder of Simply Fed. We comprehensively tackle baby feeding, and I am the mom of a 5-year-old. Her name is May. The mom of a 2-year-old. Her name is Lulu, and I'm pregnant with the 3rd daughter. So fun times all around over here.
Oh man. Okay. So it's like another daughter. So it's like all girls.
All girls. Yeah. The trifecta.
Amazing. So I imagine as we dive into this concept of advice and womanhood and your younger self and all that other stuff, there's an even deeper connection in the things that you're saying. So I love it. So speaking of diving into your younger self, when we have our guests on, I love to know exactly where they are in the present, but I also love to get a foundation of where they were in the past. So who was Andrea at age 18?
So at age 18, I was just an extremely nervous person, is the way I would describe it. I was very ambitious. I had big dreams. I wanted to be a biomedical engineer. And thankfully, I had 2 parents that were engineers. So I had wonderful role models. And I'm a big fan of the Marian Wright Edelman quote, "You can't be what you can't see." And, I grew up around the dinner table and just my daily life being with engineers, right? And so I got that exposure, incredibly privileged to get that exposure, but I also really loved, biology and human medicine. And I found out, again, through exposure, I had a lucky opportunity to shadow Shriners Hospital, which is like a children's hospital. And I learned about this world of biomedical engineering. And that's when I decided that's the career path I wanted to choose. So at 18, I was very ambitious. I wanted to tackle, gnarly, complex problems in human health and the healthcare system. I didn't know exactly what that looked like, but I knew that's what I was drawn to. But I was also a very nervous person. Like, I was not confident in myself, but I had these big dreams, and I was so relentlessly focused on being this biomedical engineer, and thankfully got admitted to Cornell University and engineering there. And I just wasn't very sure of myself. I was very nervous, but had a lot to prove, but had these big goals and dreams.
Wow. Biomedical engineering. just can we take a pause and a second for that? Just what?
Oh gosh. Oh, well, thanks for saying that. I mean, it's such a cool career. I feel so lucky because it's all about identifying problems in human health and being able to think differently of how we can tackle it. And whether that's making medical devices or, pharmaceutical medicines that can save lives, or how I took it is really redesigning systems of care in healthcare to improve human health.
Wow. So generally I go into the space where I ask you to kind of like bridge the gap for us. But before we go there, what was it that drew you to this health space to even know at age 18 you wanted to operate in the sector?
Well, when I was at that shadow opportunity at Shriners Hospital, there was something called the GATE Lab, GAIT. And essentially the GATE Lab looked at kids with different disabilities and how they had sensors and how they were walking. And so how could you use that data and information to redesign their gait so that they could get better faster? Say if they had some condition and how they might be able to walk faster so that they're ambulatory and just get better and be fulfilled in their lives. And I thought that was incredibly powerful, being able to solve problems and build things that could not just help one person, but at scale help hundreds, if not thousands, if not millions of people. And so I was really inspired about how might you use technology and other systems and processes to really redesign the care pathway. And that's really what got me ticking and seeing that impact. And by the way, we know that about women. So I also teach right now at Cornell, and all the engineering disciplines, the ones that have more women are those related to impact. And we know that 80% of the engineers at Cornell are women in biomedical engineering, over 50% in chemical engineering that are really focused on energy and the environment. And so we know disproportionately that women want to tackle kind of impactful careers. And that very much was my experience as well.
Wow, that is amazing. I love those statistics, and I absolutely 1000% relate to that, especially when considering impacting others and essentially making the world in general a better place. That's one of the main things that we stand for here at FemFuture. So I love that. I love that. So you're in this space where you are a nervous person, but you also have this desire for impact. You're exposed to this biomedical engineering world. Can you now bridge the gap for us? Tell us about the journey that you took to get from that space of being accepted to Cornell to now even teaching there and having your own business.
Yeah. So I became a freshman and I went to college, and while I was there, it was quite the journey. I was a pretty mediocre engineer. I didn't get A's or A pluses. And I tell my students now, you too can get, some failing grades at Cornell and then come back and teach here. But what I had was I was a very hard worker, and I was very committed to that goal. And so what I would say to folks is you have to have a strong work ethic. You have to be passionate about what you're doing, and not that those will always lead to success, but they'll get you a ton of the way there. Because if you want something, then that often you'll be able to find your pathway there. It might look a little different. But for me, I was just an extremely hard worker and wanted to make a difference. The other thing, though, is I learned very early on that grades only would get you so far. It's all about building a network and a community. And so I did a lot of work in extracurriculars to build communities. I was very involved with the Society of Women Engineers. After I graduated from Cornell, I was very involved with
Sweet.
Yeah, Sweet, so great. And did a lot of work in starting a biomedical engineering society in the Boston area, which is where I went after I graduated, and worked in medical devices. And that, by the way, all my friends got jobs, very early on in the fall semester in college. I literally got a job offer the last day of classes. And I just share that with folks because I'll share more about my story, but you would have not considered me, I would say, at the top of my class or a success, right? It took me a lot more effort than I think some of my peers. but then ultimately ended up working out okay because I got that job. I did okay in it. Again, very mediocre at first in engineering. But when I was there, I learned about how you can design systems around medical devices, around the technology. And that's what got me super excited. And I was actually really good at that. I was way better than average and mediocre. And then I got into grad school at MIT, where my research there was very focused on designing healthcare systems, in particular telehealth systems, which this was back in 2010, before the heyday of telehealth that we see now. But I was on a research project for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff at the Pentagon on how we could implement and scale telebehavioral health systems for service members faced with post-traumatic stress. And I saw how you could use technology such as telehealth to improve access to care. And that just got me so excited, so jazzed. And then continued in that vein of how can we improve access to care, and co-founded my first startup called Smart Scheduling, which predicted no-shows to medical practices. And the idea is that you want to be able to identify who's likely to no-show so that you could surge interventions to get them to the clinic so that they could get that follow-up cardiac rehab appointment and really improve access to care. We know that one of the big reasons why folks no-show is access to transportation. So let's surge transportation to them so that they get to that appointment, which we know is so vital. So now I've entered the entrepreneurship realm. And after that, I heard about this amazing fellowship based out of the White House called the Presidential Innovation Fellowship, which took engineers and brought them to the federal government for a tour of duty for a year. And I thought this would be incredible to be able to serve in government. I also wanted to kind of put my money where my mouth is. You always talk about government, but it's one thing to criticize government, but it's another thing to, be in the arena. And so was so grateful and felt so lucky to get the privilege to serve as a Presidential Innovation Fellow under the Obama administration, and was only supposed to be there a year, ended up staying for 3. And while I was there, I launched this major initiative at the Department of Veterans Affairs. And that's, not the end of my journey, but I want to pause there and say, I started as this very nervous person. I had big dreams, but a strong work ethic. I was a pretty average engineer in undergrad. I was a pretty average engineer in medical devices. And then, went to starting my own company that eventually got acquired by a health IT company, Athena Health. Went to MIT, did research for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff at the Pentagon, working with military leaders across the country. And then, went to the White House as a Presidential Innovation Fellow. And so if you're not feeling super excited about what you're doing and you feel like you're in this kind of mediocre spin, just keep on focused on what you're passionate, what you're good at. And hopefully it leads you down a path that you can get very excited about.
Wow. And I did my research and I'm still blown away.
Oh my gosh.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So I have so many follow-up questions, but as you were speaking, I'm going to butcher this quote, but I think it was Einstein that talked about the zone of genius. And essentially, if you ask a fish to climb a tree, then that fish is not brilliant at best. And he just kind of talked about the fact that people are geniuses, everybody is a genius. You just have to figure out what you're a genius at. So it sounds like you went through this process of engineering, which was kind of necessary to get you to a place where you were exposed to what your true zone of genius was. What advice would you have? I know you said kind of keep pushing, but what advice, if any additional advice, would you have for a listener that is still trying to figure out what their zone of genius is, what their thing is that they're really great at?
I am obsessed with this question because now I'm an entrepreneur, right? And you see all these entrepreneurs on the main stage, and there's this folklore that comes with starting a company, right? And I had an idea, now it's $1 billion, right? We skip over the parts that people are actually interested in, that are tactics that people could take. So to get shed more light on what that period looked like for me, when I was these kind of average engineer at this medical device company, what I did is I got very, very involved outside of working on my full-time job. Like I was doing benchtop science, right? I was pipetting. It was actually pretty manual labor, to be honest. You're like pipetting from here to there, and I was okay at it, but I was very good at designing experiments. I would make mistakes sometimes, but I was really passionate about the topic. And so what I did is two things. One is I let my peers, my manager, know that without letting my day-to-day project suffer, I was very interested in doing kind of off the side of the desk projects to advance myself and make that investment in myself, but also hopefully the organization. And people saw that I was a hard worker. So maybe I wasn't the best engineer, but I cared, and I was a hard worker. And so my boss's boss took notice of this and saw that I was interested in not just the technology, but the systems and processes surrounding the technology. So he had me think about the problem at our company of, you'd have engineers and scientists, say, in Boston, Massachusetts, working on the same problem as the engineers in, say, our Minnesota office. So how might we create systems to reduce that duplication and better harness the brain power and talent of our workforce? And so I designed, as part of a team, this program called Communities of Practice, which brought people together and communities together to share concepts and ideas, to really improve and accelerate our ability to create medical devices. And it went well. And I set up the framework, and I was presenting to the equivalent of the CTO of the company and the whole technical council, which, I was a baby engineer. I was 24 years old, and I was presenting to all these executives, and that experience in itself was such an important learning experience for me. And so that was an example project that I made it known. I didn't want my day-to-day work to suffer, that I wanted to pursue these extra projects to stretch myself. So that's one thing I did. And that really helped provide clarity to me that I enjoyed that part of engineering and science. And so that's actually what I used to apply to MIT and got letters of recommendation surrounding. So you can see how that works, right? You use that project as a platform to then apply for more learning. And that's what I did. Also, alongside that, I did those extracurriculars that I mentioned. And I was a benchtop scientist, right? I wasn't getting that much time and sandbox opportunities to present and be able to take leadership roles and run meetings. I didn't have that opportunity in my day-to-day job, but I knew that was something that I was actually pretty good at and enjoyed doing. So I would get involved with clubs outside of work and extracurriculars that allowed me to flex that muscle, practice a lot, and by the way, do so in a very safe environment. I tell that to folks now, you want to be able to practice those skills before you are doing them in your day-to-day job, because it allows you to take risks more easily and you feel more confident to take risks. So I got very involved. I started the Women's Network at my company. I started the Biomedical Engineering Society locally. I was still involved with the Society of Women Engineers. I volunteered a lot with Healthcare Businesswomen's Association so that I could get exposed to role models, and did a lot of, volunteer work, stuff in name tags. But here's the thing about everything I just said. When you're the organizer for all those things, you're also in networking and building relationships with folks, and they see how hard of a worker. So you're building relationships with CEOs and other leaders, and that's vital and critical. And then when I went to MIT, same thing. I got very involved with Hacking Medicine, which was this group there that was a hacker group developing technologies, and I would invite venture capitalists. So you can see how it all starts to happen, right? You use one opportunity to learn, leverage that to get to your next role. But it's often, as you see, not part of my day-to-day charge, but you're using those outside experiences to get to the next step.
Oh, I love that. I love that. I love the concept of adding that thing on. So you still have the stability of your day-to-day and what's necessary, but you're also getting the opportunity to discover what else is open and available to you. So as you're doing this, as you're entering into the zone of genius, you decide to take this leap of entrepreneurship. What was that like? And what advice would you have, even if you're talking about this business or the one that you currently lead now? What advice would you have for a listener that has the passion to potentially engage in some entrepreneurship?
So after I was when I was working at the Department of Veterans Affairs, I was pregnant with my first daughter. And at the time I was traveling back and forth between Boston and DC, and that, wasn't going to work anymore, being pregnant and starting a family, these types of things. So we decided to move to upstate New York, where joined at the time the faculty at Cornell. So moved back and had my first daughter and saw how hard baby feeding was. I had a heck of a time breastfeeding. I thought I had no idea what to expect. There was no education as part of like my prenatal journey. And all of a sudden I had this 5-pound baby, which is pretty, low weight for a baby. And
Yeah.
I was having a very hard time breastfeeding. So she continued to drop weight down to 4 pounds. It was incredibly scary. I was so connected to, my baby's health, my mental and physical health. And I thought there's got to be a better way here. And I learned that there is this clinical specialists, lactation consultants that are baby feeding experts, whether you're formula feeding, breastfeeding, no matter how you feed your baby. And I also learned that under the Affordable Care Act, these services from these clinical specialists are supposed to be covered by health plans, commercial and Medicaid, at no cost to families. And so, as a parent who had that lived experience, I was like, holy moly, this was a huge problem. I know many of my friends felt this way. I did a ton of customer discovery to validate that hypothesis. But on the entrepreneurship side, I realized, wait a second, there's actually someone that's supposed to be paying for these services for free for families. And so, that's the, entrepreneur in me that, wait, there's a business opportunity here too. But this is the part that I don't like to skip over is it took me a while, right? I had a newborn. I liked my job, but also I'm not coming from generational wealth where I can just like quit my job and work full time on a startup. Sorry, like that's not the reality for most people. And I hate when entrepreneurs like on main stages are like, yeah, and you're only committed if you quit your job full time. And it's like, well, that's not actually helpful for most people. So what I did is I found a way with teaching. I slowly kind of took down my hours with teaching over time, right? You go to 80%, you go to 60%, and then I went to 50%. But you're working on it like nights and weekends at first. And again, that's incredibly privileged that I can even see that, because a lot of folks have to work a couple jobs, right, to make ends meet. So even when I just said there is a point of privilege that I could, reduce my hours to 80% or work nights and weekends even before I did that to get some traction. But I tell folks like, do as much as you can to get traction. And if there's a there, as you test hypotheses, you can use that to get to the next level. I think all too often we think we need to go from 0 to 100, but you just have to figure out what's the next milestone that I can use to get to the next step, whether that's to raise money to help support my venture or what have you. And so that's what I did is you find little traction moments that you can then use to get to the next level. And then eventually, once I was able to show enough traction, I was able to raise some angel funding. It took me many, 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 many months to raise that money. And then once I raised that angel funding, I then jumped on full time.
Wow. Wow. Okay. So there's so many beautiful moments in your journey. One of the ones that you mentioned though, is the fact that you've had a newborn. You're in this space where, you're trying to feed your newborn. She drops in weight. It's terrifying. But even from there, you find the inspiration to engage in this new journey. So in addition to understanding your why, which is amazing, you're in the space where you've now had multiple kids, you are pregnant again, you are all of these like engineer, entrepreneur, innovator, advocate, like teacher, CEO, founder, like you're holding all of these titles. How have you found balance in life? Because my goodness, you have accomplished so much and are still accomplishing so much. So what has balance looked like for you? And I'm actually going to add the bonus question of what advice, in addition to what it's looked like for you, what advice would you have for those audience members trying to find balance? Because listen, I'm trying to find balance myself and I do not have children. I like shout out to all the moms, because I really like moms, wives. I don't understand how you guys do it. It's hard enough to find balance with just me. So what has that looked like for you?
What finding balance has looked like for me, if I had to be honest, is coming to terms with the fact that it doesn't exist. And I know that sounds pretty terrible, but there are trade-offs, right? And at the beginning of this call, right, you saw, or you might have heard my kiddos in the background. And that's a decision that I've made, that I'm not going to be, full-time in their lives, like during the day, and they go to daycare, and I'm super excited about that, because that allows me to accomplish this mission. And by the way, they see me as role models and a role model. And I had my mom as a role model. So I do see that there is so much value in that. My daughter, she does swim lessons on Wednesday evenings, and she just got her little report card, and the swim instructor gave her, she just turned 5, and they gave her a score of extremely confident. And, there's like literally nothing that could make me prouder than seeing that. And I know that over time, right, as someone who, as I said, didn't have a lot of confidence, I know that over time, sometimes that confidence gets degraded based on society, what have you. But I was just super excited to see that, because I think she sees some of that in me now, right? She sees me in conversations, speaking confidently and leading a team. And that's the way I justify the fact that, I'm not going to be fully present all the time in their lives day to day, but I take what I can get, right, in the evenings and weekends. And that's what works for me. But I don't have great balance. But that's a conscious decision that I've made and have come to terms with. And so there's no perfect, and I like to say I'm always failing forward in this arena with the idea of balance and being a parent and a professional, but you have to find a way for it to work for you. And I know that if I stop doing what I'm doing now with running my company, that I would not be happy. Like, I just know myself. Wow. And so you have to figure out like what truly makes you happy, what keeps you up at night, not in a nervous way, but I'm so excited to get to the next day to tackle this problem and this mission. And maybe that mission will change over time. And actually your mission will change over time. So I shouldn't say maybe. And just figuring out what is your mission and purpose in that moment in time, and then striking what works for you then, and coming to terms with the fact that balance might not exist if that's the conscious decision that you've made.
Oh man, I love that. I love that shift in perspective, especially based on what I feel like we've always been taught. So that's amazing. And I also love the fact that you acknowledge the example that you're setting and the impact that is clearly having. So I think sometimes society tells us that there are certain things that need to happen, but the reality of the situation is, even with the evidence of your daughter's report card, you're shown and we're constantly reminded that you were setting an example. She is seeing exactly what she could potentially become, and you're setting up the future that essentially changes. You're curating, if I can use our own language, you're curating the better future for yourself and for others, especially when it comes to your daughter in this space. I love that. That's so good. It's such a beautiful, adjustment in perspective for even myself and our audience. So, oh, thank you so much for that. That was so good.
No, thanks for letting me share it.
Yeah, yeah. So we've taken a deep dive into who you are now, your present, who you were, and how you got there. So we looked at your past. Now I'd love to ask you one of my favorite questions of the interview, which takes a deeper dive into your future. And that question is, if you could have a conversation with your 100-year-old self, what do you hope she'd share with you about the life you lived?
Ooh, it kind of makes me teary thinking about that. Well, I'd hope she shared, really, it does
Yeah.
I'd hope she'd share that she took risks. I don't know why, but
no worries. Safe space,
man. That she really took risks, and sometimes those risks, weren't successful, but you left it all on the field. And actually seriously, this is hilarious. I don't know why I'm crying. Pregnancy. I'm gonna attribute it to pregnancy.
You're good. We'll take it. Either way, even if it's just you accept it as you are.
But yeah, I think those, when you take those risks, when I look back at the moments in my life where I was most excited, it's when I was taking those risks and I was putting myself in those uncomfortable situations. And by the way, I hate when people say, put yourself in one uncomfortable situation a day. It's no, it shouldn't take that, right? You should be able to feel good in your shoes, whatever that is. And I also do think those times where you do take that leap and that step, and which can be super scary and uncomfortable, it also can lead you down a really exciting pathway. So I hope my 100-year-old self would tell me, you left it all in the field. Some of those swings didn't work out, but that's okay, because many of those swings resulted in impact. And I'm a big fan of the movie It's a Wonderful Life. That was one of my mom's favorites. And I would love for my 100-year-old self to be able to turn back and say, here's the impact that you created, with a team, with your tribe, with your community. You don't do anything on your own, especially as a parent. But this is the impact that you created with your tribe. And here are the folks that supported you along the way.
Wow. Oh my goodness. How amazing. You have taken us through your present, past, and future. Now, as we bring this interview to a close, do you have any final advice for myself or any other audience member that's working to intentionally curate a better future for themselves or for others?
I would say the only advice I have is to really trust your gut, follow what you're excited about, follow what you have expertise in, and then identify a need. And the convergence of all those three things is what you should follow, right? You got to be passionate and excited about it. It's got to be aligned with your purpose, but you have to have some talent there, expertise or secret knowledge or superpower there. And it can be something small. It doesn't need to be you're an expert fighter pilot, right? It can be small. It can be I love presenting in front of groups. And then you have to identify where there's a big enough problem to solve. And if you combine all of those things together, then that often propels you forward. And a lot of it is timing and figuring out context in the environment and then following that timing. And often I will say that when you see a crisis or see a problem, in government, when I worked there was this quote, and I forget who originally authored it, so apologies, I'm not properly acknowledging that, but never let a good crisis go to waste. And so I would say to folks is identify those areas of need and opportunity and crises, if they exist, and then jump on that and tackle it and leverage your purpose and your expertise to solve it.
Oh, wow. I love that. I love that. Whew. Another amazing negative wisdom. There's been so many throughout this interview. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being on. This has been so, so good and so, so rich for me. And I'm sure rich for the rest of the audience as well. For people that want to continue the conversation with you, can you please tell them how they can find you?
Well, would love for folks to check out our organization, SimpliFed, SIMPLIFED, simplyfed.com. Follow us at SimplyFedBaby, or come check us out on LinkedIn. But just thanks so much for the opportunity to share more about my journey and also our organization, SimpliFed.
Of course, of course. And thanks again for being on. And thank you so much for everyone for tuning in. Until next time, let's continue to engage, encourage, and support each other as we work together to curate a femme future.